This is a reading of the essay Historical Bedrock of the Fate of Jesus by Mark Bates. Subtitle: Critical Realism, Minimal Facts, and the Resurrection as the Verifiable Climax of God's Promise Plan. Abstract: The historical investigation into the fate of Jesus of Nazareth sits at the intersection of historiography, biblical exegesis, and theological anthropology. Modern scholarship often stalls between post-Enlightenment positivism, which demands mathematical certainty no ancient event can meet, and radical postmodern skepticism, which treats the past as pure literary invention. Against both extremes, this essay adopts a critical realist method, drawing on the work of Michael Licona and Gary Habermas, to establish a secure historical bedrock concerning Jesus' fate. That bedrock consists of three facts commanding near-unanimous, heterogeneous scholarly consensus. First, Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. Second, his disciples experienced post-mortem appearances that convinced them he had risen. And third, the hostile persecutor Paul converted after a post-resurrection encounter. When these facts are tested by Behan McCullagh's criteria for arguments to the best explanation, every naturalistic alternative, swoon, theft, mass hallucination, or grief apparition, fails in explanatory scope, power, and plausibility. The bodily resurrection of Messiah Jesus emerges as the superior historical inference. Situated within the ancient Hebraic cognitive environment and the divine counsel worldview, and integrated into Walter Kaiser's promise plan theology, that resurrection is not an isolated anomaly. It is the historically verifiable non-supersessionist climax of God's redemptive strategy to reverse the three cosmic rebellions, fulfill covenant promises to Israel, and restore sacred space for all nations. Section 1. Introduction: Epistemological Divide and the Quest for Historical Certainty. The historical validity of Christian theology rests on verifiable events in space-time, most notably the bodily resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 14 through 17 makes the point plain: if Christ has not been raised, then Christian faith is futile. If the events anchoring the biblical covenants cannot be known with adequate historical probability, salvation history dissolves into allegory, and the redemptive work of God is divorced from the physical cosmos. Critical realism, formulated by philosophers of history such as McCullagh and applied to the New Testament by Licona and Habermas, acknowledges the historian's subjective horizons, while insisting that disciplined evidence-based inquiry can still yield genuine knowledge of past reality. By restricting the core argument to historical bedrock, data that command near universal consensus across atheists, agnostics, Jews, and Christians, the historian can test competing explanations with methodical neutrality. Section 2. Historiographical Principles. Every historian approaches the text with a horizon of beliefs and presuppositions. A materialist horizon a priori excludes divine action. An uncritical horizon may accept legend without scrutiny. Critical realism manages these horizons by 6 methodological safeguards, the chief of which is restriction of the core argument to bedrock facts. A consensus carries weight only when it is heterogeneous. When scholars as diverse as Bart Ehrman, John Dominic Crossan, Gerd Ludemann, E.P. Sanders, Paula Fredrickson, and Geza Vermes agree on specific data about Jesus' fate, the bias of any single horizon is neutralized. Under methodical neutrality, the ancient texts are neither presumed innocent nor guilty. Hypotheses are evaluated by McCullagh's 5 criteria: explanatory scope, explanatory power, plausibility, less ad hoc character, and illumination of surrounding data. Section 3. The Triad of Historical Bedrock. Fact 1. Jesus died by Roman crucifixion. This is among the best attested events of the ancient world. It is multiply attested in the 4 Gospels, the Pauline letters, Hebrews, 1 Peter, Revelation, and pre-Pauline creeds, as well as in non-Christian sources. Josephus, Antiquities 18.3.3, Tacitus, Annals 15.44, Lucian of Samosata, Marabar Serapion, and later rabbinic tradition. Bart Ehrman states, The most certain element of the tradition about Jesus is that he was crucified on the orders of the Roman prefect of Judea, Pontius Pilate. John Dominic Crossan affirms that he was crucified is as sure as anything historical can ever be. Gerd Ludemann calls the death indisputable. Medical realities confirm the outcome. Severe flagellation with a flagrum embedded with bone and lead produced hypovolemic shock. Suspension on the cross led to asphyxiation. The Johannine detail of blood and water from the lance wound is consistent with pericardial effusion. The criterion of embarrassment further supports authenticity. Second Temple literature celebrated Stoic Maccabean martyrs, yet the Gospels portray a Jesus who agonizes in Gethsemane and cries, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Mark chapter 15, verse 34. Early Christians would not invent so embarrassing a portrait unless it recorded historical memory. Fact 2. The disciples experienced post-mortem appearances. The earliest record is the pre-Pauline creed in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 3 through 8. Paul uses the formal rabbinic terms for receiving and delivering tradition. He almost certainly received this creed during his first visit to Jerusalem, roughly 3 years after his conversion from Peter and James, Galatians chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. The creed therefore originated within 1 to 3 years of the crucifixion, long before legend could develop. The appearances were not limited to isolated private visions. They included individuals, Peter, James, Paul, small groups, and a corporate gathering of more than 500, most of whom were still alive when Paul wrote. In Second Temple Jewish eschatology, the verb appeared and the noun resurrection denoted the revivification of a physical body, never a disembodied ghost. Paula Fredrickson summarizes, "The disciples' conviction that they had seen the risen Christ is part of historical bedrock." Fact 3. The conversion of Paul, the hostile persecutor. Saul of Tarsus actively sought to destroy the early church, Galatians chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, Philippians chapter 3, verses 4 through 7. Within 2 to 3 years of the crucifixion, he underwent a sudden lifelong reversal and became the foremost apostle to the Gentiles. He cites a direct appearance of the risen Christ as the sole cause. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 1, chapter 15, verse 8, Galatians chapter 1, verses 11 through 16. Psychological explanations that posit private guilt or conversion disorder find no support in Paul's own letters. He was convinced he was obeying Yahweh by persecuting Christians. An extraordinary external stimulus is required. Section 4. Methodological exclusions. To keep the foundation unassailable, highly probable but not universally conceded data, such as the empty tomb and the conversion of James, are treated as second-order facts. Their exclusion deprives skeptics of any charge that the starting premises are sectarian. The 3 bedrock facts alone suffice to test the competing hypotheses. Section 5. Evaluating naturalistic hypotheses. The swoon theory fails medical realities and explanatory power. A battered, half-dead Jesus could never have convinced the disciples he had conquered death. The theft or fraud theory cannot explain why the disciples would suffer prolonged persecution and martyrdom for a known lie, nor can it account for the conversion of the outsider Paul. Mass hallucination theory collapses because hallucinations are private neurological events. Groups do not share them. It also fails to explain Paul's conversion, since he lacked any grief or expectation. Grief apparition theories fare no better. Ancients knew the vocabulary of ghosts and bereavement visions. Such experiences led them to conclude the person was dead, not bodily raised. By contrast, the resurrection hypothesis accounts for all 3 bedrock facts with superior scope, power, and less ad hoc character. Its single metaphysical premise, that the God of Israel exists and acted, is less strained than the multiple unevidenced coincidences required by naturalistic alternatives. Section 6. Canonical and Promise Plan Integration. Historical method can establish that an extraordinary event occurred. Biblical theology interprets its organic meaning. The bodily resurrection is the verifiable climax of Walter Kaiser's promise plan, the single, organically unified, progressively unfolding divine strategy from Genesis to Revelation. Within the divine counsel worldview illuminated by Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 and 9, and Psalm 82, three cosmic rebellions fractured sacred space: the fall in Eden, the transgression of the Watchers in Genesis chapter 6, and the disinheritance of the nations at Babel. The resurrection of Jesus, the true Yahweh incarnate, last Adam and faithful Israelite, disarms the cosmic rulers. Colossians chapter 2 verse 15, reclaims the nations and initiates the restoration of the cosmos as God's temple. A promise plan reading is non-supersessionist. Gentile believers are grafted into the nourishing root of Israel's covenants, Romans chapter 11 verses 17 through 29, while the concrete, future-oriented promises to ethnic Israel remain intact. The risen Messiah reigns as King of Israel and Lord of the nations, securing a multi-ethnic family on a renewed earth where God dwells unmediated with his people. Section 7. Conclusion. By restricting the argument to a heterogeneous historical bedrock, Jesus' death by crucifixion, the disciples' appearance experiences, and Paul's conversion, critical realist historiography establishes a foundation no naturalistic hypothesis can overturn. Integrated into Kaiser's promise plan, the resurrection shines as the space-time moment in which God defeated cosmic powers, vindicated his obedient Messiah, guaranteed the non-supersessionist restoration of Israel and the nations, and inaugurated the eternal transformation of the cosmic temple. The historical bedrock, therefore, anchors the entire redemptive trajectory of Scripture in verifiable reality, inviting both rigorous historical scrutiny and faithful theological appropriation.